Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's event, Building the Case for Social Media Archiving in Flagstaff, Arizona, presented by the Center for Digital Government and Government Technology in partnership with ArchiveSocial. My name's Morgan Wright. I'm a senior fellow here at the Center for Digital Government. The Center is a national research and advisory institute on information technology policies, best practices in state and local government. Now, through our diverse and dynamic programs and services, we provide public and private sector leaders with decision support, knowledge, and opportunities to help them effectively incorporate new technologies in the 21st century. So I'm very excited today to moderate today's event. Just want to say thank you for joining us. I know we're in for an informative session over the next 60 minutes. Now, before we begin, just a couple of brief housekeeping notes. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to all registrants within 48 hours. You can use the recording for your reference, or better yet, feel free, pass it along to your colleagues. The webcast is designed to be interactive, so folks, down at the bottom you'll see a Q&A button. Make sure you hit that. Ask us questions at any time during this presentation. Now, you should see a Q&A box at the bottom. Please send your questions as they come in, and we will get to as many of those at the end as we can. Now, if you'd like to download a PDF of the slides for this presentation, you can do so by clicking the Webinar Resources widget at the bottom of the console. And also, during today's event, just make sure you connect with everybody on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Of course, use hashtag GovTechLive and let people know that you're on this. Now, at the close of the webinar, folks, something also very important, we have a brief survey about the presentation. We do want to hear from you. We have made improvements to our programs, to our topics, based on your survey and the completed results we get back from you. So if you can wait till the end, please do stick around. Some great stuff here. Fill that out. Otherwise, if you leave early, just make sure you fill out the webinar when it's done. Now, at this time, disable your pop-up blockers. If you're experiencing any media issues or have any other problems, we have a webcast help guide. Click the help button at the bottom of the console. If you have any other issues, Reeves from our crack staff at On24 will be here to help you. So, folks, which is exciting, joining me today, we've got some folks here that are going to talk to you about social media and why copy and paste didn't cut it for compliance. So we have Susan Alden. She's the City Records Coordinator for the City of Flagstaff. We also have Meg Roederer. She's the Interim Communications Manager for the City of Flagstaff. And we have Anil Chawla. It's always great to have the founder and CEO and our good partner from ArchiveSocial. But before we do that, I get to do just a couple things. So this is our agenda. I'm going to go through, give you just a little overview about social media, not as complicated as you think. The ladies from Arizona are going to come on and talk to you about why copy and paste didn't cut it for compliance. Anil's going to come on and talk to you about some very interesting things about the legal aspects of social media use. And then at the end, again, put your questions in, keep those coming in. We're going to do Q&A at the end. So really, here's what happens with social media compliance when people start thinking about what we're supposed to do. They think it's complicated. You look at this board, it's complicated, I can't do it. Well, folks, that's really not the problem. The problem is not how complicated it is. It's actually you. You make it complicated because you want to do a lot of manual processes. You want to do things that take a lot of time, a lot of effort, that are hard to repeat, and it's hard to find when you need it. But look, really, there's a couple of easy solutions. It really is easy. All you have to do is remember that there are some do's and some don'ts to social media in terms of how you manage it. In other words, can you delete a post? Can you archive things without getting in trouble? What are the do's? What are the don'ts? We're going to cover some of those today. But first, what we're going to do is when you do this, we're going to turn you into social media superheroes. And we have our two first social media superheroes joining us today. So let me introduce you to the first lady that's going to be speaking, and it's Susan Alden. Now, she is the City Records Coordinator for the City of Flagstaff. She's got 30 years of experience in records and information management, and since 2006, she has administered the Public Records Management Program at the City of Flagstaff, there in Flagstaff, Arizona. She previously worked as the head of the Records Management Program at Washington State Archives in Olympia, Washington. Boy, that's a big change in climate there. And she's been a consultant to Arizona State Library, Archives, and Public Records, and has worked as an academic librarian. She has a master's in library and information sciences, of course, naturally, from the University of Arizona. So, but before we finish reading the rest of Susan's bio and introduce you to her, let's do our first poll question. And our first poll question is, what is your opinion of social media as a public record? It is definitely a public record by law. It might be a record, but our activity is not worth retaining. You feel strongly that it is not a public record, or you don't know. So, again, those options are it's definitely a public record by law. It might be a public record, but our activity is not worth retaining. You feel strongly that it is not a public record, or you don't know. And as you answer that, what we're going to do is these results are going to come up. We're going to look at the results, and then I'm going to turn it over to Susan for about the next 10 minutes, and she's going to cover and tell you about their experience in Arizona. So let's see what those results are. So 75% of you, which is great, definitely you think it's a public record by law. 10% think it might be a record, but it's not worth retaining. Just a little over 3% feel strongly it's not a public record, and about 10% of you don't know. So, Susan, that's actually a really good lead-in for what you're going to talk about today. So let me turn it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Morgan. I want to talk about the challenges of managing social media as public records. Social media sites are widely used by city staff and council members to connect with and inform the Flagstaff community. Communications Manager Meg Roederer will be talking more later about how the city uses social media. At present, there are about 43 social media sites used for city business, with over 1,600 new postings and comments every month. Many council members use social media for city business. Social media offers a unique opportunity to easily reach a very large audience in real time. The very opportunity that social media offers is also a challenge, however. Numerous discussions in the past with the city attorney's office focused on a growing concern regarding the city's inability to track and preserve social media communication, since in Arizona it's clearly a public record. Arizona Revised Statutes 41-151.18 defines public records as all books, papers, maps, photographs, or other documentary materials, regardless of physical form or characteristics, made or received by any governmental agency in pursuance of law or in connection with the transaction of public business. Not being able to track and preserve social media communication was a serious issue in terms of managing the city's public records, but also a legal liability. There were also discussions with the city attorney's office regarding how would the city respond to a request or a subpoena for social media records. Other municipalities in Arizona have received this type of request. We were just holding our breath, hoping it didn't happen before we had a way to effectively respond. The facts at that time were grim. We had no systematic capture of content on any of the social media sites used for city business. There was no capture at all of metadata or context. The Arizona courts have made it clear that metadata is a public record in Arizona through the landmark Arizona Supreme Court case Lake versus City of Phoenix. We had no ability to restore content that was deleted by social media account owners. There were no search or data export capabilities for any of the social media sites we were using. Yeah, we could ask staff or council members to copy and paste content from a social media posting to a separate document, but this method is clunky and unreliable. It's time-consuming, prone to error, and there is no authentic capture in native format, no metadata, no context. In short, it was a disaster waiting to happen. Most of the social media technologies we looked at offered very limited solutions. None of them provided all the features the city needed to effectively manage social media records. The features we needed were the ability to capture and store records in their native format. Under Arizona Public Records law, agencies must provide records in the format in which the records are retained unless there is a compelling reason not to do so. Preservation of the context for each social media record. Context is essential for accurate capture of a social media record. A sophisticated search capability that would allow us to filter results by keyword, date, and by social media site. Archiving that captured content continuously, not just once or twice per day. And a digital signature for each record. If the city's social media records ended up as part of court proceedings, the digital signature would be essential to verifying the authenticity of the record. Having completed our review, we decided that ArchiveSocial offered the best solution since it provides all these features and more. Getting approval for funding was a tough fight in a tight budget year. In spite of my best attempts to document the need for effective archiving of social media records, preliminary feedback from the budget team was not favorable. Then the city attorney's office stepped up and met with the team, making a convincing case that effective archiving is the cost of using social media for city business. To use social media without any systematic capture was too high a risk for the city, and we couldn't afford not to do it. They convinced the budget team that using ArchiveSocial was a good business decision and necessary. That's all for me. Back to you now, Morgan.
Well, thank you very much. Great job. And now, guess what? You guys, we always add value, so now we have a second speaker. So now let me introduce Meg Roeder to you. Meg is the City of Flagstaff Interim Communications Manager, and as I tell you about the rest of her, before I do that, let me get to your poll question here. Oh, I'm sorry. We've already done that poll question. So used to doing it in this order. Let me tell you, Meg is the City of Flagstaff Interim Communications Manager. Now, throughout her 15-year tenure with the City of Flagstaff, she's gained invaluable experience working in recreation, purchasing, tourism, planning, and in administration as the executive assistant to the mayor and council, and is currently working in communications. She holds a bachelor's degree in public relations from Northern Arizona University. She's also established in the Flagstaff community as a business owner with the Family Music Store. Hey, great, I was a music major in college. I love this stuff. Arizona Music Pro Incorporated for the past 22 years. I might have to come down and visit just to see what kind of instruments she got there. So now her knowledge, she's got community values, uses a variety of communication strategies, and she delivers important messages to residents and visitors throughout the city website, social media sites, press releases, surveys, and the Cityscape publication. But before I turn it over, what's your favorite instrument, Meg?
Oh, well, I love the guitar.
Oh, I love the guitar too and banjo. Okay, so, well, with that in mind, let's turn it over to you. The floor is yours now.
Well, thank you, Morgan. And my presentation is going to focus on compliance with the Arizona Revised Statute 9-49-15. So as you see on the slide, it is involved with proposed new or increased municipal taxes and fees, notifications, and exceptions. So we need to comply with any social media requirement before we do any type of proposed new fees and taxes. So I put a few extras there on the slide, but the most important thing to keep in mind with this is that the information shall be posted on the municipality's website, and if the municipality uses social media, it must be posted on that social media site. And as Susan mentioned, we have over 43 social media sites. And so with the implementation of this, after we were informed by our legal department that this is something we need to comply to in November 2016, we had to figure out how we were going to implement it. So the first was the notification process that was reviewed by our legal department. And then secondly, using ArchiveSocial, we could identify what staff members were using city social media pages and how we could use their expertise to comply with this ARS statute. So we sent an internal email to the staff members saying, okay, this is what we need to do now in order to be compliant with this new statute. And with this, we needed to make sure that everything was up to date. And through the use of ArchiveSocial, we were able to develop a database and identify those staff members. And if they weren't on the, if they were using social media and they weren't connected to ArchiveSocial, they're then informed to notify Susan to get registered. So compliance really required 3 steps, which is the legal department will notify the communications office, and then I will then notify this these staff members and post it on the our main social media site with the City of Flagstaff, our Facebook and our Twitter. And then the staff member is informed to share that post in order to be compliant to their department web pages. So we've had to comply with this new statute with one of our examples here, which is our parking notice. Park flag is something that will be implemented this spring, but we needed to notify all of the followers on our Facebook and our Twitter sites and our social media sites. So I developed one single post and placed that on our Facebook page, in which all the staff members were then notified that were registered with ArchiveSocial to share this notification, and that would make us compliant, and we wouldn't have no problem with compliance with this archive with ARS 9-49-15. And so how to help us manage this is we use ArchiveSocial, and we can track the number of social media sites and staff members, and it makes compliance so much easier with using this tool. And as Susan mentioned, we do have 43 social media sites, and it's growing as well. And currently we have 27 registered social media users or staff members and 3 registered elected officials. And that basically concludes my presentation. So back to you, Morgan.
Well, thank you very much, Meg. And we'll have to compare stories sometimes. I started playing banjo at 14, played in a band up until about 3 or 4 years ago, so I may have to visit your store, pick me up a new guitar. So that sounds good. Hey, and guess what, folks? Now we get to get to the next fun part of this, which is I get to introduce you to Anil Chawla. He's the co-host of the GovTech Social podcast and the founder and CEO of ArchiveSocial. But before I finish the rest of his bio, now let me get to our next poll question here. So our next poll question is, how is your agency currently retaining records of social media? So you are not retaining your own records and rely on the networks. You take manual captures like screenshots, copy and paste, which that's the title of this webinar. That's the tough way to do it, obviously. You use a personal backup tool like Backupify or SocialSafe. You have an automated solution for archiving, or you are already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So you're not retaining your records and rely on the network. You take manual captures. You use a personal backup tool. You have an automated solution, or you already are a happy ArchiveSocial customer. And speaking of ArchiveSocial, ArchiveSocial is the public sector's leading provider of technology. They help government agencies archive and manage risk related to social media. So ArchiveSocial has enabled hundreds of government entities such as the city of Chandler, Arizona, Pima County, and the United States Department of Justice, the world's largest law firm, retain records of social media for legal protection and public records requirements. Now, the company was selected for the prestigious Code for America Accelerator in 2013, recognized in 2014 as a cool vendor by Gartner, which is a leading analyst firm, and honored as a GovTech 100 company in both 2015 and 2016. Congratulations on that, Anil, by part of our company here, GovTech Government Technology Magazine. Most recently, ArchiveSocial collaborated with the White House to launch a historic social media archive of the 44th presidency, which that's groundbreaking. So, again, congratulations on that. Let's go to our poll results real quick, Anil. So it looks like 61%, wow, are not retaining their records and rely on the networks. 7% say they take manual captures. Another 7% say they use a personal backup tool. 11% use an automated solution, and another 11% are already a happy ArchiveSocial customer. So it sounds like we've kind of laid the groundwork for your presentation here, Neil. So I turn this over to you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Morgan, for the introduction, and you very much have laid the groundwork. So excited to have everybody on the line here tuned in today. And I want to start by thanking both Meg and Susan for sharing their experience there in Arizona. As the months and years go by, social media is unquestionably becoming a primary channel of communication. So this statute here in Arizona requiring disclosure on social media is a really good example of that recognition of how social media ensures the public is stayed informed. But it does create these requirements, and we've had these requirements all along around record keeping in government. And over the years, there's been questions about how this applies to social media. I was excited to see about 75% of you answer that poll with social media absolutely being a public record. But I know there's about 25% of you that had other answers. And so where I'm going to start today is to discuss that notion of social media as a record, and then really touching on again, the story, this experience shared by the staff at Flagstaff in regards to this statute and how they've addressed it. How your agency can approach this issue in a way that is automated, it's low cost, and enables you to do more and more on social media. So again, thank you both for sharing that experience and laying the groundwork for me. And for those of you tuned in, again, I'm with ArchiveSocial. We are an archiving company. We're not the only one. So in today's presentation, I really want to be an educational resource to you on the types of issues that agencies are facing. And I want to be a resource to you in terms of how to think about archiving. I'll share how we've thought about it as a company. but most importantly, want to arm your agency in terms of record keeping in general and the issues that social media creates that are unique to social media, how you might address those. So on that note, we do have that Q&A window, so please use it, and all of us will be happy to answer your questions here at the end. And then I do want to mention that last poll in terms of record keeping, very, very compelling to see that 40% of you are doing something to keep records, whether that's with us or with anything else. It's a really strong trend that we've seen over the years. But for those of you who are still relying on the social networks to have the data, we'll talk more in depth about your trade-offs there, and then, again, give you hopefully an action plan coming out of this presentation to get the data in your control and ensure your agency is protected. So let's jump right in, and again, Susan did a great job talking about the requirements in general about social media being a record, a public record in Arizona. That's true in every state in the United States because of the way the records laws are written. They are written regardless of physical form, and when they were written many decades ago, they were written in a future-proof fashion to account for changes in technology such as email and now social. But for those of you who are not in Arizona, or perhaps you're in Arizona and you want more clarification on this, we at ArchiveSocial have put together an educational resource that consolidates the guidance from your state on this issue. And so when we provide this slide deck out after the presentation, you'll be able to click on your state to see the guidance from your records bodies, your Secretary of State. We just put that all in one place. And if you want to look that up, we also have a bit.ly URL, bit.ly/SM public records, that you can take a look at right now to get a sense of not only the core records law in your state, but the actual guidance that specifically called out social media and your requirements as an agency. Now, that's the records law side of things, which we all recognize can feel somewhat academic. And what was interesting about that first survey was that a good percentage of you said that while social media might be a record per the law, our activity isn't generating records. And what I want to do here is ask you all to take just a few moments to reflect on what's happening day in and day out on your social media presence, and really dive into that question of the communications that you're distributing and receiving in that mix day to day. Can you ensure that new records are not being created, or in fact, is that interaction generating new records? And I'll do that by sharing some examples of the kinds of situations that generate social media records that must be retained. And I'll start with the really big, catastrophe type situation, the crisis situation. This happens in government at all magnitudes, and one of our customers, the city of Orlando, dealt with what was just an absolutely horrific crisis last year. In fact, the country in general last year dealt with a number of different crisis situations around both mass shootings and weather events. And while this may seem like, okay, this is not the kind of topic we really want to talk about here, I'm going to make the opposite case. This is exactly why your agencies are on social media. Social media provides the emergency infrastructure for your community, because when you're in crisis and you've created a social media presence that has some engagement, your ability to get information out, to protect the public, to keep folks informed, to minimize the media outreach to you directly, to keep your staff focused on the emergency, is exponentially better today thanks to social media. So this is exactly why you have social media for these worst-case scenarios. And I really want to applaud Orlando in this case, because this was just an absolutely terrible circumstance. Middle of the night, as it's unfolding, the first thing they do is say, all updates are coming over Twitter. No email or phone calls, please. And they maintained that. They provided frequent updates to the general public, to the media. We were all concerned about it, all watching, and they were transparent in a way that only social media allows them to be. But again, that's where you might generate records, whether it's a massive catastrophe like that, or even a small circumstance where you need to communicate very quickly and keep people informed. On the flip side, there are situations that might happen that are not physical, but they are also crisis situations, but they manifest online. This happens more and more these days because social media, as we know, allows things to go viral. And so some of you may recognize this photo. Unfortunately, this is a situation where a woman posted a photo of her duct taping her dog's mouth. Just again, a really terrible thing, but it led to this firestorm online. Now, this woman posted it on her own social media page, her own Facebook page, but it was reshared because, of course, it wasn't a very not something a lot of people like to see, and they called her out on it. And ultimately what happened was the woman had location tagged the city of South Daytona because she used to live there. She didn't live there anymore, but she used to live there. And this led to a public outcry against the city of South Daytona in Florida. Now, this is a city of 12,000 in population that posts a handful of times a week on social. And they were hit with this controversy of, how could you let this happen in your city? This woman should be arrested. It's an animal cruelty. What's your police department doing about this? And they received more than 24,000 comments in just a few days. And so, again, social can be overwhelming, and in a crisis, again, situations that you do not control can affect you, whether physical or virtual. Now, here's a silver lining on the story. South Daytona turned this around completely by saying, hey, we agree, this is terrible. This woman doesn't live here, this person doesn't live here, but we're going to help track her down. And they use social media to provide frequent, transparent updates over the course of the week to the public, and ultimately working with law enforcement across the country, located the woman that posted this, and she was arrested. And by the end of it, using social media, they had completely turned around the general public sentiment, where the public was thanking South Daytona for all of their efforts and for their transparency. But again, during this process, a lot of back and forth. National media actually made records requests for the social media content, and with 24,000 comments, you've got to have a way to manage all of that. And then day-to-day, government agencies exist to serve the citizens. So answering questions, as we had that example with the statute, making folks aware of anything involving changes in taxes and fees, that may lead to questions. And then providing that clarification on social certainly generates new records. And so day-to-day answering questions, providing customer service will absolutely have the potential of creating public records of long-term value. So if you're on social, engaging on that two-way conversation, if you're really using social media with a purpose and demonstrating value to your citizens, which I hope all of you are able to do that today, then without question, somewhere in the mix, public records of social media are being generated, and they need to be retained. Now, this slide's about, well, when does somebody ask you for that? And the top tweet is something that actually happened almost 30 years ago now, where a citizen in Seattle was following the public Twitter feeds of the Seattle PD and was seeing some information that seemed to be incorrect or missing, and actually said, I would like an archive of all of your tweets for every police beat, and please consider this a Public Records Act request. So this is 3 years ago. A citizen made a public records request for social media using social media, and that's the real sign of the times, and again speaks to the value of social. It is frankly the primary way for many government agencies today to really get information out to the public. Now, we at ArchiveSocial across our customer base have seen an uptick in public records requests specifically for Twitter and Facebook content and other social networking sites. But that's still a very small number of records requests, just to be very honest with you. What's much more common are records requests that are general, that do not specifically ask for social media sites, but they certainly include them. So you'll see these examples below. All notifications of the street closure. This is a great example because a lot of agencies in the middle of a winter storm or a thunderstorm flooding use social, of course, as the most effective way to inform citizens of street closures and other issues. And so if you get a records request about all notifications includes all notifications, including what's on your social media sites. So a majority of our agencies that we work with have recognized this, and even if it's not a request for a specific social networking platform, many times the most pertinent information to respond to that request is off of their social media sites. Now, this is not only an issue at the local level. This is not just for state level public records laws, but one of the exciting things I think for us as a society, and certainly for us at ArchiveSocial, is the recent presidential transition brought to light the importance of social media from the standpoint of the highest office in the land, from the leader of the free world. And so our past president, the 44th president, President Obama, was the first president to use social media, given the changes in technology. And again, it goes to the core principles of government that the public seeks: transparency, accessibility of public officials. And the president had a Twitter account. The staff used social media to really reach the public. And so this was a really, this is a perfect example of the value of social media, of how the highest office in the land reaches people in ordinary towns and around the country. But at the transition time, there was a strong recognition of this is public record. In fact, there is a records law called the Presidential Records Act. And the White House made one of their top initiatives in the last, I would say about the last 2 months, to have a way of archiving and retaining this content for federal law, to be able to transfer to National Archives, where National Archives will retain these social media postings to the end of the Republic. That's actually the law. And that's how important it is. And they made this a really big initiative. We were very excited at ArchiveSocial to be strongly involved with the capture of the data, the transfer of the data to National Archives. And we've actually been able to launch this open archive that provides the public with access to all this content, but again speaks to the White House. This is not an issue too small for anybody. This is important for every level of government, certainly from the federal level down to the smallest towns and departments in local government. Now, in Arizona, we've certainly seen some examples of records issues, and this being an important topic. This is, I believe, from about 2 years ago at this point, or actually, I'm sorry, about a year ago, where Pima County was actually requested to produce content from their social media sites, and this was something that was covered widely by the local journalists in the state of Arizona. And again, to their credit, this was an issue that was strongly discussed within the county, and they have employed archiving. So this is something that has come up in the state, and it's very good to see places like Pima County and, of course, Flagstaff addressing this issue. Now I'm going to get to the heart of a question that was raised by one of those polls, which is, 60% of the respondents to that poll of you said that you rely on the social networks to have this data, and I'm sure many of you are still wondering, why is that a problem? Well, today when you post on social, your citizens post on social, you hope those postings stay on Facebook and Twitter and these other sites. But the reality is there's no guarantee. And the records law in Arizona and in states across the country is about having the record, whether it was deleted later or taken down. Once it was posted and communicated, the record, if it fulfills your retention schedules and the content is something that must be retained, you must have the record. And because the social networking sites have zero guarantees for retaining your data, and data can be deleted, many states have come out explicitly advising agencies that they must take that data out of the social networking sites, have a plan to export it into your control. Now, we at ArchiveSocial wanted to know how big of a problem is this really. So last year, about exactly a year ago, last January, we used our technology, which automatically detects deletions on Facebook in near real time. And we surveyed 400 different public agency Facebook pages to see how much was getting deleted. In 1 month, from 400 pages, nearly 7,800 records were deleted off of Facebook. Now, that affected 3 out of 4 of the pages we looked at. So, again, a majority of the pages had at least one deletion. Now, many of the pages actually had dozens of deletions. And when you talk to these agencies, they'll tell you, wait, our policy is we don't delete. We tell our staff, do not delete anything. The reality is that some staff members do delete because social media is distributed, and we have to acknowledge that. But a majority of the deletions also come from the citizens. And as you know, an email from a citizen to you is a public record. A social media message from a citizen to you is a public record. And so or could constitute a public record. And so a citizen deleting this content, you may not even know that happened, as many of our agencies were not aware that this was happening. So having a record-keeping approach in place makes a lot of sense. And of course, then technology like ours that can tell you that it's been deleted is also helpful. So you have to have this data in your control. And one final note on this is, and not only to take it from me, but you can go to Facebook's website and look at their law enforcement page. And the law enforcement page says, law enforcement, you are free to subpoena Facebook for records of data that you want, but please issue those subpoenas before anything has been deleted. So I'm paraphrasing the exact language, but you can go to that site and see it, that Facebook itself is even telling you that deletions are kind of a point of no return. So a really big issue. Now I want to spin this around to how this has helped in at least 2 cases, and then we're going to get into record-keeping approaches, again, to arm you all with some action plan moving forward. And again, we heard from the folks at Flagstaff of why this is important, how they've implemented it. I want to share these two examples of how this really protected two agencies that we work with and pays its dividends to be proactive. So the first example is out of Margate, Florida. This is a situation where a citizen was promoting their own blog in a commercial fashion over and over on the city's Facebook page. And so the city had instituted a policy that said that we will not allow spam and profane content, other types of problematic content to stay on our page. We will moderate that. And they followed through on that policy. So when the citizen posted promoting themselves in their blog, the city removed it and hid it. Now, the citizen noticed this and complained actually on Facebook saying, hey, you can't do this. There's a strong records law here in Florida. Everything I say is could be a public record. You have to keep it. The city said, we do keep it. We archive. We archive with ArchiveSocial. Well, then the citizen followed up and said, okay, but I feel like you're singling me out. So the citizen actually issued a public records request asking for all deletions and hides of comments over the course of a few months. So again, this can be a painful thing, but they have every right to ask for this. And it's great when you're as an agency, you can say, yeah, you're welcome to have that information. In fact, we have a record of everything. We have a clear policy, and here's proof that we've enforced it consistently. And that's exactly what Margate was able to do with an archiving solution in place. And then one more across the country in Santa Barbara, this police department knew that this was an issue they should address at some point. And I'm sure a lot of you are in this boat of, yeah, we should archive, just like we archive our email. We should have some kind of record keeping, automated record keeping in place for social. We'll get to that when it's a priority. Well, this is the kind of thing that's never a priority until it's already a priority. And fortunately, what happened was we were in touch with the Santa Barbara Police Department, and they said, okay, you know what, we'll start a free trial of your project just to check it out. And 3 weeks into the free trial, the city had been running these gun buyback programs, which we all know are controversial. And the city received a public records request from the National Rifle Association. So this is not a records request that you can take less than seriously. You have to do this right. This is a powerful organization. They have every right to request it, and very valid reasons to request it. And because they were in the free trial, in a few clicks, we're able to pull all of the content related to that gun buyback program, where there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of controversy, a lot of clarifications. And if you read this case study, which I encourage you to do, they talk about how if they had not started that free trial and been archiving, they don't really know how they would have been able to produce that content reliably. And so, again, it is something you want to be proactive on and can pay significant dividends. Again, we're one of the options. There are other options. Our goal is that you're able to protect your use of social media so that you're able to benefit from social media long term. Because you've taken the proactive measures that you're obligated to take and really can help you out. So let's get to this. Let's get to how you can do that. And ultimately, I encourage you to come up with some form of archiving social media in an automated fashion. Again, as we heard from both Susan and Meg, it has to be automated. There would be no way to truly comply in a manual fashion. This is social media is real time, it's dynamic, it can be very resource intensive to try to keep up with it manually, and you can't really do that reliably. So you need some kind of automated approach. And what I'll lay out to you are the 4 core factors I encourage you to consider, and I'll explain why these are so relevant to social media. Some of these apply to any kind of content, but some of them are really unique to social. And the first one is frequency. And why this is pretty unique to social is if you think about email and files and other types of content that your IT has been archiving for you for a long time, that's data that gets transmitted across your internal IT network. Your IT controls your email, your IT controls your file servers and your SharePoint servers and so forth. But social media sits out on Facebook.com, it sits out on Twitter.com and YouTube. All these third-party private companies really have the data. So you need to get it in your control, and then there's this problem of deletions. Deletions can happen at any time. So you've got to get it in your control as soon as possible to minimize the risk of data loss, to minimize the risk that you don't have a record that you were supposed to have. Frequency is key. You want to look for near real time. Comprehensiveness is about having a full record. When archiving tech vendors first started approaching this issue, most of those vendors, I'll tell you, not to throw my industry under the bus, but most of the vendors decided to just hand wave social media archiving, turn it into an email and stuff it in an email archive, or use website archiving to scrape the content. Well, that's really not treating social media like a full record. You're converting the data, you're not being comprehensive, you're missing out on this issue of metadata, that our friends at Flagstaff highlighted, and I'll give you an example of that. And so you have to be comprehensive, and that also includes having not only what you post, but what your citizens say to you, because both sides of that conversation can constitute public record. Authenticity, this also speaks to the metadata issue that we'll look at here in a second. It's about having data that you can stand behind. You want it to be evidentiary quality. Why would you archive all this information to show up to court and not be able to stand by that record because someone says, well, you just converted that data. You just copy and paste it into a doc. How do I know a copy and paste is an accurate record? So you need to have a record that you can stand behind. And so look for an archiving, record-keeping approach that can prove that this was the content at the time that it was posted on the social networking site and hasn't been tampered with. And in fact, we can submit it as legal evidence. And finally, context really speaks to the dynamic, rich nature of social media. We've had records requests that are for Facebook posts that have hundreds, if not thousands, of comments on them that came in over the course of weeks. How do you produce that? How would you produce that today if you're not archiving? If someone made a records request to you for a Facebook conversation from 6 months ago with 4,000 comments on something that was viral, how would your staff do it? What would it cost you to do it? What's the risk of you not getting everything together properly? It's probably pretty high if you don't have a proper archiving solution in place. So again, when you're looking at archiving solutions, it's not about storing data. A lot of archiving products out there will store data for you, and they'll store the data partially or to some extent. You want to make sure you have everything, and you want to make sure that the archiving product or technology or approach you use can reproduce it and say, yep, here's the Facebook conversation with all the comments, all the videos, the live stream videos, photos, all in one place. So those are the issues. I'll give you some brief examples on that because I spent a bit of time kind of explaining it, but just give you some visuals. So the first visual I'll give you is on metadata. As was called out, Arizona is one of the few states that has a Supreme Court ruling stating that metadata is just as much public record as any other part of an electronic message. So let me give you an example. This is a tweet, 126 characters. Having that 126 characters, maybe in a screenshot or a web scrape, is not the complete record, because a tweet is an electronic message that has data about how the message was sent and transmitted. That's what metadata really is. And we've all heard a lot about metadata with political circumstances and so forth. And here you can see this visual of all that text. Well, that tweet has more than 2,000 characters of metadata, information that describes when the tweet was sent out in terms of timestamps. What were the user IDs of the users involved in the tweet? What was the location of the tweet, if the location tagging was on? What Twitter client was used? That's the metadata. And again, in Arizona, it has been ruled by the Supreme Court that metadata is as much public record as the content itself. So you want to look for an archiving approach that not only captures the text you see on the screen, but the metadata associated with that record. And when I talked about storing data, there are a lot of easy ways to grab Twitter and Facebook and stuff them somewhere, but there's a big difference between having some of the data and having complete comprehensive data. And I really want to emphasize that social media has a lot of details. Social media communications have a lot of details in them. Those of you who use Facebook, you know this. You know how rich of a platform this is. Not only can you share your content yourself, but you get these comments back, and then you can reply to comments. You have these nested message threads, and these comment threads can go on quite a while. In fact, if something is really touches with your audience or goes viral, there could be thousands of comments. So you want to pay attention to the details, multimedia, not only in what you post, but citizens can put a photo in a comment back to you. Now we have live streaming. And so when you look at an archiving approach, there are a lot of vendors that will say they archive Facebook. Well, what does that mean? Go through your social media content and really test their product. I would advise you to test a social media archiving product to see, does it really get the level of detail that you expect? Because when it comes to legal situations, we all know the devil is in the details. And you want to make sure your archiving product is actually capturing the full fidelity of that record, not just the top-level information. And then this goes to context. When you're producing information, it's one thing to say, yeah, we'll be able to search for it. Our approach to archiving has a search capability. We can search by keyword and find it. It's another thing to remember that social media is this living, breathing conversation. And then how do you put these conversations back together? So this is an example from Instagram, where you might find this one comment, but you really need the full post with all the other comments on it and all of the imagery and so forth. And so look for an archiving approach that puts it back together for you. It reconstructs that conversation. Because ultimately, when you're fulfilling a records request, if you just provided that comment alone, you're not really providing enough information, and so it's probably going to lead to this back and forth and a lot of confusion. And then if you have to compile a conversation of hundreds or thousands of comments together manually, that's very error-prone and probably not worth your time. So again, look for an archiving approach that can minimize that cost and time. And I'll give you this example with the the Margate example. Best practice in this industry is PDF. A lot of archiving approaches in the past were dealing with email and come from the financial services industry, so a lot of archiving approaches tend to produce content in Excel. Just imagine a Facebook conversation in Excel. So really, PDF is a best practice here. And when I talked about that Margate example, the citizen asking for all content that had been hidden, well, Margate did this search in our system. It highlighted everything that had been hidden or removed. But what we wanted to avoid was just sending back just what was hidden or removed, because you can't understand that content without seeing the whole conversation. So look for technology, and this is our product's output, of reconstructing the whole conversation. In this case, we created a 2-page PDF that has the whole conversation and highlights the matches. So you have the whole story, and that really does minimize that back and forth and reduce the risk for your agency when responding to these requests. And finally, I'll wrap up by saying that I'm talking, I'm sure, to an audience of communicators as well. And a lot of times folks will say, well, archiving is something that IT deals with. More and more, this is an issue that communications deals with, because you have the credentials to the social media sites. And as a public information officer, for example, you have involvement in production of public records requests. The good thing is that archiving does not have to be just about the legal side. It centralizes that content in one place. It gives you a history that you as a communications team can review. And we've now developed technology that actually provides active alerting and analytics day to day. So for example, if you have a social media policy, you can get alerted on content that violates your social media policy. So you can react to it much more quickly and remove it. If you're interested in being responsive to your citizens, this technology, while it's archiving, can let you know if you're being asked a question, for example, so that you can be extremely responsive to your citizens. And then over time, you can look at the analytics and show that to your stakeholders, including things like how your audience, how your citizens are responding to your content, how positive or negative that response is. So all this kind of stuff builds upon the fact that you have this repository. So a lot of benefits to communications teams as well. And then the last thing I'll say is that we at ArchiveSocial, while we're not the only archiving solution in this market, we are the only one that's focused predominantly on government. And so we're here to be a resource to you. And to the extent that if you are thinking about archiving, try to get the budget, you haven't been able to do it yet, and you encounter a crisis, we actually have a pro bono initiative here where you can go to this website and you fill it out with the crisis that you're in, and we will provide full access to all of our technology, including the alerting and analytics technology, for 30 days to help you get through a crisis at no cost, no obligation. This is truly our way of giving back to the public sector by saying social media is incredibly valuable, particularly in crisis. We want to make sure you're able to use social media, so we'll give you the protection. Because inevitably a crisis does lead to public records requests in legal situations. But we'll give you that protection for 30 days to help you through those public records requests. Again, no obligation to us except for that we ask for your feedback at the end of that 30 days. And so that's a pro bono initiative. And with that, I'm going to put my contact information on the screen, and we'll take some questions.
Great, Anil. Hey, thanks, guys. And we've got a lot of questions coming in, so folks, keep those questions coming in. We're going to get to as many as we can in about the next 10 minutes here. So if you guys got that, if not, let me know. We can flip back to it. So let's get to some Q&A, because we've actually had some interesting ones come in. I think you hit upon one of those real quickly, Anil. Clara Archer from Gilbert, Arizona was asking, said their town uses Snapchat and Instagram, and do you archive those? So I think you were talking about Instagram, but can you address Snapchat as well?
Right, and we do archive Instagram as a network. I think the question here was about Instagram stories, which are content that's pulled out of your feed. So some of these situations with social networks that are merged, like and Snapchat's now been around for some time. Some of the challenge in this space is that these social networks come out, and in some cases they don't provide access to archive the data. So no third party, to our knowledge today, can access Snapchat's data to archive it. And so it's a really strong consideration for public agencies. You might have to fall back to things like screenshotting and copy and paste. And so agencies that we work with absolutely do use Snapchat, but they have to take a very manual approach, and they also limit what they do there to minimize the risk. So at the end of the day, you need a record, a screenshot's not a great record, but it's better than nothing. And if what you're posting on Snapchat maybe duplicates what's elsewhere, if there's not really a back and forth conversation, you're not really accepting incoming messages, you can minimize your risk and take a measured approach until these companies provide access for archiving, so that ArchiveSocial and other vendors can do that.
Right. And for this next question, I want both Susan and Meg to weigh in on this, and then Anil, probably you on the back end here. But Curtis Chandler, Arizona State Library, asked about in Arizona retentions based on what the record is about, not how it was created. So for both you, Susan and Meg, how do you folks deal with different records series and how they're controlled? Like, I assume that there are some records that have to be retained longer than others. So how do you ladies approach that?
Well, I'm wondering if that question is specific to social media records. I'm guessing that it is, so I'm going to answer it from that standpoint. A lot of the social media records, like a lot of email, have a very short retention, but many of them are substantive. So there's no single retention for them, just like there's no single retention for email. So there's no one retention period that applies to them. Typically it would be until administrative value served, but if the posting is regarding a policy that the city is implementing, that could be a very long time. Meg, do you want to speak to that?
Well, in regard to the statute that I'm working with, we would keep that post on and not delete it and have that there as long as possible. So there is no set retention timeline on that.
Jenny. And Anil, let me get to you this one for you as well. This is from Karen Fryer, Pima County Attorney's Office, which this sounds like a great question from them. How does this archiving system, or basically any, I mean, you're going to have to deal with the issue of making required redactions in both the text and the metadata prior to releasing the records. In other words, there are sometimes you can release a substantial portion of the records, but not all of it. So how do you redact that cannot be released, and as well as the accompanying metadata that might go with the redacted data?
Okay, yeah, and if you don't mind, Morgan, I do want to touch on that last question as well from Curtis
Sure.
at the Arizona State Library. And I want to make folks on the line aware that a year ago we actually did a similar presentation with the Arizona State Library, actually with Jerry Kirkpatrick. So I strongly recommend our audience who has questions about the legal requirements to take a look at that government technology presentation with Jerry Kirkpatrick, where he walked through the Arizona statutes. And ultimately, as was answered, it is about the nature of the content. Not some regions will implement a catch-all rule of, hey, we're going to retain content for all emails will be retained for 5 years, all social media will be retained for 3 years. That's kind of a fallback approach that folks implement, but by the letter of the law, it really should be about content. And I want to mention that because archiving solutions should have something built in to accommodate for characterizing your records based on content and being able to dispose based on content. That's a really important requirement there. Now, to the question that was just asked in terms of redactions on text and metadata, it's a really great question. What our customers have done, and this is why PDF is a best practice, because when it comes to PDF content, which a lot of government records are in PDF, there are well-established tools for redacting from PDFs before that content's sent over. And so, again, look for an archiving technology that generates the content, exports it out into PDF, and then you can utilize the PDF redaction tools to make sure that you don't disclose content that's not actually public record.
Right, and kind of a follow-on to that, there was an ancillary question, too, that said, how do PDFs maintain metadata? So, Anil, when that record's exported, what does the metadata look like that goes with that record when it's exported in PDF?
I love these questions because there's only so much time that we have that if I had a few more hours, I'd go through all the things to look for. Again, with an archiving solution, again, it is about that the metadata is important, particularly in states like Arizona. And so I can tell you how our system works. Again, other vendors that actually do this might do something different. I'm not really aware of the extent to which other vendors do this, but in our system, we don't put the metadata is quite sizable. We don't put that in the PDF, but you have options to export the metadata, and so we provide a highly organized zip file that has the PDF that's human readable and understandable, and for every record in the PDF, it has a identifier that says the record ID, and then we have a folder of metadata that corresponds to those IDs. So again, in an archiving solution, you want to look for being able to not only get out what the content looks like, and reconstructed, but also the metadata supporting photos and videos in full resolution. You do need all of that.
Yeah, several years ago, nobody could spell metadata. Now it is the word of the day between politics and government. Hey, Karen and Meg and Susan, let me ask you a couple questions. I found it very interesting, having worked in state and local government. Now that you're putting out information, and the government or the state has said you have to put out the information on increases in taxes, how has that been received? And do you get a lot of comments when you do that, or is that mostly just you put it out there because it's required? Or do citizens actually engage on that? Do you get some additional collaboration based on that?
Well, with that particular instance, we have a park flag posting regarding increased taxes and fees, which is a topic here in Flagstaff that draws a lot of attention. So we did have some citizen comments on those particular posts, and we allow that conversation to do its course. We respond accordingly. But really, we want to fulfill the legal requirement if the state says, did you actually post prior to initiating that increased fee or tax? And we could say, yes, absolutely, and we can show that we have done that in all of our social media sites.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about too is based on that, you folks, look, you've done. I mean, I love the content. You went into a lot of good detail. You have obviously got a lot of expertise. But I was a little troubled to find that 75% of the people, or I think it was somewhere around there, weren't actually automating this. Can you folks talk real quickly about the challenges you had before, maybe when it was automated, and then that's actually part of the title here, why copy and paste didn't cut it for compliance, and how, regardless of the solution, but once you get an automated solution or it's archiving, how it makes your job easier as well? Because I think there's a lot of people looking for that kind of guidance on this call today.
Yeah, you bet, Morgan. We fortunately didn't have to use the manual method, but from looking into it and from looking into other tools, we knew that we would be dead in the water if that's the method we were using to respond to a request or a subpoena. And it was actually Jerry Kirkpatrick's webinar that brought me to the realization about ArchiveSocial, and that's when I looked into it. So we didn't have to go down that ugly road to know that it wouldn't work for us. Flagstaff is a very wired community, very savvy, and we knew that if we tried to respond in that way, we would get shot down and end up in Superior Court in a hot minute.
Well, and actually, one thing, too, speak to the point, you used the city attorney to help make the business case. How did you do that?
Well, I think it was a blessing. I had been conversing with the city attorney's office about this literally for years, and we knew that we were in trouble without this type of a tool. I thought that my presentation would be enough to the budget team, but it clearly wasn't, and fortunately the deputy, well, he's now our deputy city attorney, jumped in and said, this is what we need to do as the cost of using social media for the city. So once they heard that from the deputy city attorney, and it was agreed upon by the city attorney, I think that finally got their attention. So I'm very grateful. I highly recommend that to anybody who is facing budget issues with respect to this sort of thing.
And Anil, this next one is for you, and it kind of combines two things about the cost of ArchiveSocial, how much does it cost, and then John Carter, City of Cottonwood, says on some plans you cover unlimited accounts. He's asking, can we cover all the city department accounts, parks and rec, library, etc.?
Well, sure. Thank you for asking. And in terms of pricing, that's obviously an important consideration. We sell transparency, so a fundamental tenet for us is to make our pricing transparent. So you can actually go to our website and look at the pricing link at the top and see our plans. And that goes to John's question. We actually all of our plans except for the most or least expensive, the starter plan. The starter plan is the only one that worries about how many profiles you have. But after that, we actually do not price based on how many profiles you have because, again, almost everything we do is in government. And we learned over time that government's very distributed. Different departments and individuals set up different pages. And so, yes, to answer your question, a majority of our customers buy at the city or county level and can include all of their departments as long as they're in the appropriate pricing plan and are able to add pages as needed without direct implications on their pricing. Really, the only way pricing changes with us is over time. If your social media usage increases substantially, you might move to a different tier. But we have a fixed pricing model that allows you a lot of flexibility as a public agency to start a new page and not worry about that being an immediate cost and having to go through procurement. And just to give you an idea, we've designed our pricing to really make this an issue you can address proactively. So 80% of our 80% of public agencies in the United States will fit under our standard plan, which is less than $5,000 annual, which is typically a discretionary spend. And we do have pricing plans below that. Of course, we have pricing plans larger than that if you have a very large social media presence. But it is a fixed cost, very simple, no hidden fees, and just trying to reduce the friction, make this a very easy procurement action for a lot of agencies.
And anytime there's been any kind of emergency where you have to, all hands on deck, I mean, those costs can run up pretty quick, as you and I have found out on many of these webinars, and Anil, with City of Orlando, San Marcos, the floods. So, folks, I'm telling you, it's not if, but when you will run into a situation like this. So just make sure you avail yourself of all this information. And look, folks, we're at our 1 hour time. Love to keep this going. We've got still more questions here to answer, but we can't get to them. I've got to keep our 1 hour commitment. So I'm going to wrap it up here. But first of all, before I do that, I want to say thank you to Meg Roederer and Susan Alden for being on this call. Thank you, ladies, so much. Great information. Anil, also, thank you for being on. We want to thank our partner. We can't put these on without great industry partners like ArchiveSocial. So, folks, thank you very much for that. If you have any questions, you can contact me here. Make sure you fill out that survey at the end, please. We want you to fill that out. Let us know how we can help you and do better. You will, within 24 hours, get a link to this presentation. You can also download the slides. Just click down below to download the PDF of the slides today. Folks, but we want to say thank you for joining us. We enjoyed our time together. We hope you guys got some value out of this, and we look forward to seeing you again soon at another government technology event. Everybody have a great afternoon.